York City, ground zero for the attack on America. This day's horrific events began with the familiar turbine whine of jet engines over New York City, but this Boeing 7
that we all experience and feel. I've talked to Governor Pataki, I've talked to Governor Gilmore.
All right, Peter, forgive me if I don't respond to you carefully because it's still very noisy down here, and I'm going to kind of tell you what happened to me. We're now about 4 blocks from the scene, as you can see. Even at this hour, it's like being on the edge of the crater of a volcano. The smoke is still pouring out, the air is still acrid with fumes. Everywhere
continues to function.
Approximately 8:42 a.m. Eastern Time. The explosions and fireballs broadcast live by television helicopters, which then horrifically spots the second attack plane, a United Airlines flight hijacked from Boston, taking dead aim at the World Trade Center's South Tower. It's now
flight loaded with 92 people crashes head-on into the North Tower of the World Trade Center.
In Kabul, Afghanistan, not the result of U.S. military action. Paula and Aaron.
In the movies or on television, these two buildings are symbols of the New York skyline. We need to be careful about what we assume is on here.
Yes, great that you both came in and that you're here and that you're willing and able to help. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Well, as I said, things are really intensifying down here.
And as I said to you,
Being caught.
Very much.
you want to come around?
There, but as you can imagine, a lot less activity.
Oh, there's the outside.
He mounts the cross with no thought that any further deed has to be accomplished. He lingers 3 hours.
Face of this terrible act against our country. I should add that the briefing here is taking place in the Pentagon.
Jim Stewart, good work with getting that new information about increasing evidence, hard evidence, nothing conclusive yet that bin Laden is tied to this. But do U.S. intelligence officials know where bin Laden is? Still in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Baluchistan? Do they have any idea?
As recently as the beginning of the week, they had reason to believe that he was hanging out in the 2 locations that he has most frequently been at in Afghanistan.
It will certainly be made available to each of you. The questions.
Her phone was left.
With sometimes as many.
If you would like to say anything, and then we will allow the others to make a remark or two.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Ladies and gentlemen, as the Secretary just said, today we have watched the tragedy of an outrageous act of barbaric terrorism carried out by fanatics against both civilians and military people. Acts that have killed and maimed many innocent and decent citizens of our country. I extend my condolences to the entire Department of Defense families, military and civilian, and to the families of all those throughout our nation who lost loved ones. I think this is indeed a reminder of the tragedy and the tragic dangers that we face day in and day out, both here
And the United States response to it today.
Brett, I think those expressions were entirely appropriate. The concern for those who were injured and the concern for the families of those who were killed. The commitment that we would do everything we could to bring the perpetrators of this tragedy to justice and do what we could to ensure that it didn't happen in the future. As a member of the Intelligence Committee, though,
I'm going to interrupt you. Just note that there's the President.
I'm delighted that the President has returned to Washington. I think the American people want to hear from him. I hope we'll hear from him tonight. And I also hope that as a result of this tragedy, that the commitment that we all express verbally, we can translate into action, because there are many things we could do to improve our intelligence and our national security, and I'm afraid that, unfortunately, it may take an
Not 1 but 2 jets had pummeled into the 2 towers of the World Trade Center. First the one on the east side, then the one on the west side. In the moments which followed chaos on the streets below, People were reported to be coming out of buildings, one after another, trying to give aid to their neighbors as the smoke and flames began to tower out of the World Trade Center. 80 stories up for one of them, a higher distance for the other. And there are literally people hanging out of the windows here as you watch. There is a jet plane inside that tower of the World Trade Center as this man or woman hangs out and wonders what in the world has happened around him or her on an early morning day, a Tuesday morning, just getting to the office to begin the nation's work. The flames continued to tower, and then minutes later, the first of the two towers collapsed to ruin beneath. At the time, many of New York's bravest and New York's finest, the fire department, the police department, was on scene giving aid to those who suddenly saw their world collapsing around them, and then the building tumbled down onto their heads, and now a massive scene of destruction beneath as people working with hands and tools scramble to try and find anyone in there who may be alive. The entire New York City Police Department and entire New York City Fire Department brought into work. Every single human being who was part of those two operations was called in this morning. Now the United States military has brought in 2 aircraft carriers to station in New York Harbor. One will be used as a hospital. The National Guard and members of the military to come in and assist in this rescue and recovery effort, which clearly even the largest police and fire forces in all of the United States could simply not handle. Many have described this as America now at war, certainly an unprecedented attack. The number for the death toll is unthinkable at this hour, and no one willing to speculate, except for one representative who made his way out of the Washington Police headquarters this afternoon, or early this morning actually, and suggested that the estimates were that as many as 10,000 lives may have been lost.
Leadership, both in Washington and here at Wright-Patterson.
Throughout the day, she's with us from one of the hot...
There could have been any number of flights leaving from Boston today, and at Newark Airport, a flight headed for the West Coast as well, all 3 of which, given the fact that they were going to be transcontinental flights, would have had huge amounts of fuel on board. It was...
And head to school, bus driver.
We could see people jumping from the top of the building.
At midday, the financial district of Lower Manhattan looks like a war zone. No idea if another attack is imminent. Hundreds of companies throughout New York send their workers home. Bridges and tunnels across the Hudson River are closed. Mass transit shut down.
There are over 1,000 rescue workers, probably about 2,000 that are deployed, trying to get into the buildings, trying to find people, trying to search for people. The governor and I spoke a couple of hours ago. The governor has deployed the National Guard to relieve them because our people...
Tomorrow, some conflicting information on that. Another report suggests that those flights might be postponed indefinitely. Before I give you any more details on New York City, I'd like to check in with Robert Gates right now, who is the former director of the CIA.
People working the World Trade Center tower in that area, thousands more visited every day, and then today they flooded in police, fire, and other rescue workers fairly quickly. CBS News medical correspondent Elizabeth Caledon is at New York University Hospital tonight. Elizabeth.
Dan, within moments of hearing the news, New York City area hospitals and indeed hospitals throughout the region shut down all normal operations, canceled all elective surgeries, and basically transformed themselves into...
At 1-800-HELP-NOW. That's 1-800-435-7669. QVC acknowledges today's events and expresses our heartfelt concern with this national tragedy. For more information, please turn to your TV news channel. In light of these events, QVC will be temporarily suspending its broadcast.
The University of Dayton and the Fairborn school system, Fairborn schools announced that they would be closed again tomorrow.
Find words to express sympathy for the families of those lost this day.
Well, it's very good.
Firefighters and police officers found themselves momentarily helpless. Training to save others, they suddenly had to save themselves.
It's a war. We've been attacked. It's like World War II.
Tonight, crews are standing by to start searching for the thousands of people feared missing in the debris. James Walker, ABC News, New York.
helpless, that was one way to contribute. An early call for blood led to lines of donors.
We anticipate a tremendous need for blood, so we actually set up several blood donor areas within the hospital for staff to donate. We've now run out of the donor bags for people to donate blood.
Again, Dan, and as you mentioned, the census here, we are only just beginning to tally the number of injured. In fact, several of the doctors here told me that the injured they're seeing are, in fact, the emergency workers, the firemen and police who were called to the initial plane crash.
About what has happened in his home city of New York.
World headquarters in New York. 4 commercial jets hijacked and deliberately crashed today. 3 of them hit buildings, 2 the World Trade Center Twin Towers, a 3rd hit the Pentagon. The 4th hijacked airliner went down in southwestern Pennsylvania. New York's towering World Trade Center reduced to rubble. The Pentagon smashed and smoking. Uncounted thousands of people apparently dead or injured. In New York, it's described as a catastrophe in terms of dead and wounded. The figures are unknown. Here's what's happening right now. Rescue workers are scrambling through the war zone remains of Lower Manhattan as well as the Pentagon itself. On a normal day, up to 50,000 people worked in the Twin Towers alone, and many thousands of visitors went through each day. Casualty figures elsewhere include the more than 250 passengers and crew on the 4 hijacked jets, and perhaps 100 dead and injured at least at the Pentagon. But there are few places in the air tonight anywhere in the United States. There are few planes in the air anywhere because the FAA has grounded all civilian aircraft until at least noon tomorrow. Nothing is supposed to fly until at least noon tomorrow, when the FAA will have some further information. By the way, the stock exchanges will also be closed tomorrow. President Bush will address the nation from Washington tonight. It originally was scheduled for 9 o'clock Eastern Time. We're told that will be moved up some. Exactly when the president has